Hello again, everyone. I'm Felicia Housden. I am the Prevention and Advocate Coordinator for Choices. And once again, I am here with you to do the Healing Trauma Group. We'll be doing the second session today. And the second session is Power and Abuse. Before we discuss traumatic events and what those are, and define that, I want to define trauma again. In our last session, we talked about what trauma is, and we defined it. And it is an event that occurs in a sudden and forceful way, affecting one's ability to cope. So, traumatic events. Trauma can be a threatening event that you experience, a threatening event that you witness. So you don't have to be the person who's experiencing it to actually experience the trauma. All you have to do is witness it. Or it's a threatening event that you hear happening to someone you care about. So it could be something that you just hear the story of, but because of your investment in the person and how much you love them, hearing their reaction to it affects you. We're going to list the different types of trauma specifically that can happen to a person. Some of these may be vague. I might go into them a little bit more in depth as we go along. The first one is abandonment. Accidents, and that's any accident that creates a situation where you're not the same. That could be anything from a car accident to a fall, anything that creates, like I said, a situation where you never go back to who you used to be and how you coped with life prior to the accident. War and combat, that's pretty self-explanatory. Domestic violence. And underneath domestic violence, it's interesting because it's all of these for domestic violence. Emotional, sexual, physical violence. Injuries. Illness. That can be anything that can be debilitating. Crohn's disease, lupus, cancer, things that change your life. Painful or a frightening medical procedure, anything that is major surgery can create a trauma. Kidnapping, sex trafficking, loss of a loved one, immigration, leaving your place of where you've known your life to be and going to a different country, that has to be very traumatic. Mugging or robbery. Natural disasters, that can be anything from earthquake to tornado, hurricane, flood. Being arrested. Rape and assault. Witnessing violence or murder. You don't have to be the person experiencing it, like we stated in the last slide, to have it be traumatic. Witnessing violence or murder can have an impact. Witnessing violence between parents, that can have an impact. You don't have to be the one being abused, but if you're watching people that you love abusing each other, that can be very traumatic. And then the last one is intergenerational trauma. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide. Intergenerational trauma or cultural trauma. These are things that have happened to you, or it can be passed down in stories, but it affects you generationally. It's in your DNA. They've been talking about this more as the neuroscientists are getting more into studying trauma, that traumatic situations can actually be passed through DNA. So over here, I'm going to circle. This is slavery and the impact that has on the African Americans in our country. This is the concentration camps, the Holocaust that can have an impact on people who are of Jewish descent. This is displacement and refugees. And we've seen a lot of that in war-torn countries. And then also the Indians, the Native Americans in our country, and what they went through when they were put in Catholic schools and their hair was cut off and they were taught not to use their indigenous language. So these are all traumatic events that are intergenerational or cultural traumas. We're going to be speaking about gender expectations. And this is just a graph to show you that all forms of trauma, women are at greater risk of interpersonal violence than men are. As you look at the graph, any type of abuse, men are likely to have those happen at like 13%. Any type of violence, it goes up and bumps up to almost 29% for women. Partner abuse, intimate partner violence, is at 10% for men. And then partner abuse goes up to 25% for women. And then family abuse is at about 6%, and family abuse goes up to 11% if you're a woman. So this is a graph that, and this was a graph that is pretty recent. It says at the bottom that it was 2018. So women are at greater risk of interpersonal violence than men are.
Gender expectations, and they're defined by a person's society, their culture, their religion, their family, and their peers. And I'm going to take each one of these and we're going to expound on some examples on each. We'll start with society, and the examples are, what you learn and your expectations from your community, from your school system, from your civic groups that you hang out with, and that you're a part of. Culture. Culture is your heritage, your DNA. Groups of people who bring a culture to your life, like Latino culture or African culture, Eastern European culture, Italian culture, American culture, Russian culture, Asian culture. So there's plenty. And all those groups have different ways of being for men and women. Religion. There's many religions, and that's your spiritual beliefs and your values. Christianity has something different to offer than Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, and there's many other religions as well. Family, it's what's passed down from generation to generation in your family, and the values of your family and what they stand for, and the things that are celebrated in families. And your peers are your friends and your neighbors, the people that you hang out with every day. And we're, gender expectations in all these areas have an impact. And I want to, the disclaimer at the bottom of this slide is, that it's harder for someone who is transgender to know gender expectations. And now we have some questions that we're going to discuss surrounding gender expectations. The first question is, how are boys and girls treated differently? I think the expectation of knowing whether you're having a boy or a girl nowadays with the technology of sonograms, I think that rearranges our expectations when we're told we're having a boy rather than a girl or a girl rather than a boy. I think from the moment that they're born, they're wrapped in two different colors. Boys are wrapped in blue and girls are wrapped in a softer pink. The toys that they're given to play with as they grow older as children, boys are given sports paraphernalia, balls, bats, footballs. They're given bulldozers and cars to play with, and they're given things to build things with, like Lincoln Logs and Legos. And where girls are given baby dolls to nurture, they're given cradles to put the baby in and strollers to stroll the baby. They're given Barbie dolls to dress up and play with. They're given little kitchenettes and easy bake ovens and little vacuums, things for nurturing others. It's very different. Social messages come from family members, communities, teachers, movies, music, and video games. So what are the social messages that boys get, and how are boys supposed to act? Let me think about that for a minute. What I think of is they're taught to be tough. They're taught not to show their emotions. They're taught to be resilient. They're taught to suck it up. They're taught that there's an expectation to be strong, to play sports, to make money, to be independent. And those are just a few things. What are social messages that girls get, and how are girls supposed to act? I think as they get older as well, girls are taught that, emotions are accepted from them. They can tend to even be dramatic and get away with that. I think women are taught to depend on others for their needs. They're taught to be quiet, not to speak up too much. They're taught to nurture and put others before themselves. And these are the things that I think are expected and taught. And they're taught to be beautiful, skinny, and to meet an expectation that's put on a magazine for them as women.
With gender expectations, it feels like that we are making boxes for men to be in and women to be in. So we're slamming them in these boxes that they can't get out of. And just to recap, this is the act like a man box, and this is the expectation in this box. And it is for men to be brave and stoic and don't let their feelings show. They will have to earn a living and support others. They're going to have to be stronger, and they're taught that they're stronger than women. And that they need to be competitive, tough, aggressive, strong, and in control in order to be successful. This is the act like a woman box, and this is the box that women are put in, and that's rigid. And it is to be quiet, polite, nurturing, and caregiving, to put their own needs aside and for others. They're taught that women are weaker than men, so they will most likely have to be dependent on a man for their needs to be met. Be pretty, sexually attractive, a good housekeeper and homemaker, and a good mother. And don't talk back. And don't be too smart. So, as we're looking at these things, they're pretty rigid, and um, I don't think that they're serving the world like they should. So let's ask ourselves the question of what would our world be like if our roles were reversed and the message were reversed? And that's not necessarily even good as well. We might want to, count balance, allowing people to be people, as opposed to, separating the genders and putting them in such rigid boxes. There will be a video attached to this PowerPoint at the bottom of the PowerPoint on the prevention page that you can access, that is actually a cute little parody of how the world would be different if the roles were reversed. And I encourage you to click that and check that out. It's a YouTube video. In the last few slides, we've been talking about gender expectations. We've been talking about what is expected of men as opposed to women, and the act like a man box and the act like a woman box. And with all that information, I would pose a question to you. Would a woman or a man be more at risk to being abused? And we would say women would be. This is the key point. When the members of one sex have more power in a society, the members of the other sex are at greater risk of being abused. There is a myth that people with power will protect those without power. In this view, men are supposed to protect women and adults are supposed to protect children. In reality, people with power have the opportunity to devalue and abuse those without power. Think about your experiences as a woman, as a child, as a person of color, an employee, or any other role where you had little or no power. Think about what it's like to be the adult, the white person, or the rich person who can take advantage of someone with less power. So power can be abused, and it can create oppression in all facets of society. For the next few slides, we're going to be talking about the connection between power and abuse. On this slide is the power and control wheel, and it's a very, very, very important wheel in learning about power and control in relationships. And it's used by a myriad of agencies. It's not just domestic violence agencies. It's used in batterers intervention. It's used to teach law enforcement. So it's a very important wheel that we use. And I'm going to give you the introduction to how it came to be. In 1984, the staff at the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, DAIP, began developing curricula for groups of men who batter and for the victims of domestic violence. They wanted a way to describe battering for the victims, the offenders, for practitioners in the criminal justice system, and for the general public. Over several months, they convened focus groups of women who had been battered and men who were batterers. After listening to their stories and asking questions, they documented the most common abusive behaviors or tactics that were used by men against women. The tactics chosen for the wheel were those that were most universally experienced by battered women. So that's how that came to be. So it's a very, very poignant wheel because it's comes from the actual batters and comes from victims. We're going to start at 1 o'clock, and I'm going to relay the information that's on the wheel. And we're going to start with using intimidation. Makes me feel afraid or unsafe with actions and gestures, looks, throws things, breaks things, damages my property, abuses pets, and displays weapons. Using emotional abuse. Puts me down, makes me feel bad about myself, calls me names, makes me think I'm crazy, misinterpreting or overreacting, plays mind games, humiliates me, makes me feel guilty or ashamed. The next one is using isolation. Controls what I do, who I see, what I read, where I go, and who I talk to. Limits my volunteer, religious, or outside activities, monitors my behavior and communications, uses jealousy to justify actions. The next one is minimizing, denying, and blaming. Makes light of the abuse, doesn't take my concerns seriously, denies abuse ever happened, shifts blame for the abuse to me by saying I caused it. Using children. Makes me feel guilty about the children, uses the children to relay messages, uses visitation to harass me, threatens to take the children away, uses privilege, male privilege usually, treats me like a servant, acts like the head of the household, makes all the big decisions, defines each person's role in the relationship, uses gender, race, class, etc. stereotypes against me. Using economic abuse. Prevents me from getting or keeping a job, makes me ask for money, gives me an allowance, takes my money, refuses to let me know about or have access to shared income. And the last one is using coercion and threats. Makes and or carries out threats to hurt me, threatens to commit suicide, threatens to report, embarrass, or out me to an agency or others,
threatens to leave me, pressures me to commit illegal actions. So we're going to list the various forms of abuse just to make them more clearer and with some examples. Physical abuse. And examples of physical abuse are hitting, choking, slapping, punching, kicking. Sexual abuse. Examples are rape, unwanted touching, and coercion into acts that you don't want to do. Emotional abuse is name-calling, yelling, and put-downs, mind games. Economic abuse is an allowance, no access to accounts or funds, and no money. Coercion and threats are examples are, if you don't do such and such, then I will do such and such. Intimidation, cornering, punching walls, and destroying things. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. So if there is an incident that happens, they treat it like it's small when it's huge. Denying that any incident ever happened, or they blame you for it by saying, if you hadn't done such and such, I would not have been abusive. Using children, sending message through children, holding the children to get access to you doing something or producing something for them. That one's the hardest, I believe, and the worst abuse, because children have no part and shouldn't have any part in adult matters, but abusers will use children to get what they want. And then using male privilege, treating you like you're a servant and having the expectation of having things done in the home, not talking to you about that and negotiating those expectations, but automatically assuming you're going to do it and putting pressure on you to do it. So using male privilege and not giving you access to making decisions that you should be a part of. I love you. Those words are supposed to be so wonderful and so warming and kind and all-encompassing. But these words are used by abusers in a detrimental way, because they're abusing you and you're loving you at the same time. So it creates a bond, a trauma bond is what they call it nowadays with the neuroscientists studying trauma, where love and abuse are equal when they shouldn't be. Trauma is tougher to move through when the person who is doing the abuse is your parent or partner. This creates trust issues and causes perpetual confusion as well as pain. We're going to be talking about characteristics of people who abuse others. And the reason why it's important to talk about these characteristics is if you're single and you're dating, having this list of characteristics to measure the person that you're dating by is so very important. These would be listed as red flags, that if you see these, that you should terminate the relationship, because these characteristics will turn into problems later on in the relationship and you could end up being abused. If you're in a relationship, it is important to look at this and measure your partner by these characteristics, to truly look at your relationship and make decisions on where you're at, so that you can make decisions on whether you should stay or you should go, because nobody deserves to be abused. So we'll start with the first characteristic, which is jealousy. And this is not a small jealousy. This is jealousy that is debilitating, meaning you can't look at a member of the opposite sex, or if you have relationships and friendships with members of the opposite sex and you've had them for years, there's a demand to stop these relationships. There's a demand to see your phone, to look at your text messages, your phone calls, your social media. So it's overbearing. The next one is controlling behavior. These can start out very subtly, like, why are you wearing your hair that way? Why are you wearing that top? It's very sexually provocative. I suggest that you wear these, or a demand to wear something different. Those are just examples. And over time, those can turn into more controlling behaviors and more severe ones. Quick involvement, not giving time to learn each other, to learn how to be friends, getting to know backgrounds. They want quick involvement. And mostly because if you stuck around and got to know them, there would be no relationship. And that they know this. Unrealistic expectations. And most of the time, these expectations that are demanded, nobody can fill. But he's going to make you feel like that you should be able to. Isolation is next. Have you ever had friends that got in relationships and then they fell off the face of the earth? This is used by an abuser to isolate you from the people that love you most, especially family and friends. The people that support you the most are the ones that are going to go first. Blaming others for problems. When you see somebody not being able to take responsibility for their own actions, that's going to turn to be a problem. Even if they're not blaming you at first, sooner or later you will be blamed. Blaming others for feelings. Hypersensitivity. Cruelty to animals and or children. That's a huge one. Playful use of force and sex. If their use of force is being played off as, I'm just playing with you, that is a slippery slope that can turn into sexual abuse over time. If they're making you uncomfortable in this vulnerable space, it can turn into rape very quickly. Verbal abuse, even if it's not towards you at first. It could be towards a waitress or towards a family member, a mother, their mother. Sooner or later it'll be turned on you if you are watching them be abusive in their language towards others. Rigid sex roles were like the gender expectations that we just talked about in the slides prior. The rigidity of this is what a man does and this is what a woman does, and there's no other way about it. That puts him as the breadwinner and you as the homemaker, and there's no way around that. There's no fluidity and no exceptions. That can turn into a problem over time. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One second they're nice, the next second they are angry and intimidating, to where you're walking on eggshells and you don't know what to expect from day to day or moment to moment. That is a big red flag and a characteristic of a person who abuses. And if you're hearing a history of past abuse and past relationships, a protective order here, or going to court for an assault and battery here, regardless of what they're telling you, most of the time, there's always an exception to a rule, but most of the time, that history doesn't just get wiped away. They're going to treat you in the same manner. Threats of violence, hitting walls and or breaking objects, if they're showing that type of intimidation, could be turned on you quickly. And use of force during an argument, if they're cornering you or pushing you to get their point across, or just hunting you down relentlessly and not giving you a space to have to get away. That can turn into a problem later on. So these are all characteristics and red flags. Something to remember. Remember that the use of alcohol and drugs can make all of the mentioned abuses in the last slide even more problematic. It will make these 10 times worse. We're at the end of our session 2 on power and abuse, and I hope you learned a lot from this session. Like the first session where I left you with a grounding tool, I'm going to do the same for this session and every session until the end. Today we discussed a lot about power and abuse that could have been triggering. it's really important to have an internal space that's of safety. So that's what the grounding activities are all about. So I don't want to leave you in this space if you have been triggered. I want to bring you back to yourself. If you've been abused or experienced trauma, the need for safety can be even more important. There's external safety and internal. And internal safety is just as important as external safety. Internal safety can bring you back to being grounded to where you can actually be very, very aware of your decisions, your patterns, and you can make better choices. That's why it's so important for us to teach you grounding tools. So today is going to be a visualization exercise. So the biggest thing that I want you to have in front of you is a piece of paper and something to write with. Because this visualization exercise, you're going to be coming out of this visualization exercise with a symbol that represents this exercise. And having that symbol and being able to draw it only solidifies it as a space that you can come back to. So I want you to get your piece of paper and pen in front of you, but then I want you to sit back in your chair. I want you to start relaxing your shoulders and ease into your chair. And if you're not in a chair, if you're on a floor, if you're a meditator, you can get in the lotus position. If you're on your couch, just sink into it. Keep your spine straight. Feet on the floor. If you're sitting, and I'd like for you to close your eyes, or if you're not comfortable with closing your eyes, just soften your gaze and lower your eyelids a little bit. Whatever feels safe to you. And I want you to start taking a few deep breaths in through the nose, out the mouth. And again through the nose, out the mouth. And with each breath that you take in and blow out, I want you to blow out your stress. So I just want you to take in good energy with the in-breath and blow out your stress with the out-breath. So once again, take a deep breath in and blow it out through your mouth. Feel the tension release from your neck to your shoulders to your abdomen. Breathe in. Breathe out the stress. And release the tension in your buttocks and your thighs and your knees and your feet. Once you're in this space of relaxation, I want you to start thinking of a place that makes you feel comfortable and secure. It may be some place you've been to, or it could be a fantasy place. It could be a place in your home, or it could be a place outside. It may be a favorite chair, or it may be in your bed. It may be at the beach or at a lake, in the water or on the shore. It could be in your garden or in a beautiful meadow. It could be in the snow or at the top of a hill, wherever you feel safe or whatever brings you comfort and causes relaxation. That's the place I want you to think about. If you can't think of any place where you feel good, think of a place where you feel free from fear, relaxed, or maybe even bored. I want you to keep your eyes closed and notice all the details in your place. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? And that can be both the inside feelings and it can be the tactile feelings of what you feel. Like if your feet were in the sand, you would feel the sand around your feet. What do you taste? Because when you're next to a beach, you can taste the salt water. So what do you taste in this place? Experience every part of it. Now what I want you to do is make any changes to the picture that would enhance the peacefulness and security of the experience. You can take things out or you can add things. I'm going to give you some time to do that. So once you've finished adding or taking things away to secure the peacefulness of this space, I want you to enjoy this place and embrace the peacefulness of it. Keep your eyes closed or your eyelids in a soft gaze or lowered. Now let your mind choose a souvenir or a symbol that will remind you of this experience in the future. The symbol can be an object that you bring back with you. It can be a sight that you imprint in your mind. It can be a sound or it can be a sensation. Take a minute to receive your symbol. Once you've received your symbol, I want you to take time to look at it from all sides in your mind's eye. And I want you to feel this symbol, and I want you to stay connected with it. When you have your symbol, I want you to slowly open your eyes and begin to focus again on the here and now. And when you are fully present, I want you to think of your symbol. Now, I would like for you to draw that symbol on your piece of paper. And as you're drawing, I want you to listen to me a little bit on the reason why we've done this visualization. It's another grounding tool. If you are finding yourself in anxiety, if you're finding yourself in a place where you're full of anger or out of control and can't seem to pull yourself together, or if you've been triggered by an experience, a smell, like we were talking about in this session, I want you to think of your symbol and walk yourself through that symbol back to this safe space. Lowering your shoulders and breathing yourself into that space, because the symbol is going to be your gateway to that place. We're all going to have different pictures or different symbols in our mind that bring peace. It's going to be our own experience, but know that yours is valid. That's the main reason why we're drawing the symbol. And again, once you've been triggered or if you're in a space, try this next time. Remember your symbol and allow it to be the doorway back into that safe space to create calm and internal safety. And do this before you make any decisions. Thank you for your time this week with the second session of Healing Trauma, which was Power and Abuse. And again, I hope that you learned something. And next week, we will be learning the process of trauma and self-care, and that'll be session 3. I've enjoyed this time, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you.